Howdy, and welcome to the podcast. If you're unsure how you got here, don't worry. You have unwittingly stumbled into the #1 podcast about Poverty Flats, Wyoming. If you're a return listener, welcome back. I'm your host, Connor Jones, and I'm here to share another hilarious story about the outdoors and growing up just about as close as you can get to the middle of nowhere in northwestern Wyoming. This week, our podcast is sponsored by the Copper Corner Cafe in Basin, Wyoming. The Copper Corner is open for breakfast, lunch, and dinner Monday through Saturday from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. Come on in and try any of their delicious menu items featuring homemade bread for all sandwiches and, of course, their famous pie for dessert. Breakfast is served all day, so come on in to the Copper Corner Cafe. We're also sponsored by the Wyoming Welcome Program. They distribute Wyoming Welcome baskets to new residents of Park County, and each basket includes coupons and goodies from local businesses. If you want to claim your free basket or join in on welcoming newcomers to the Bighorn Basin and get your business's name out there, just reach out to Haley at HALEYJ@WyomingWelcome.com. And she'll be happy to get you a Wyoming Welcome basket or include your business in them. And now, the podcast. Well, we had the 6th grade track meet today on Thursday, May 9th, over at the middle school in Powell. And a lot of parents turned out. We had about 130 6th graders participating, and those kiddos ran, jumped, and threw, and it was a great time. You know, it is great to be getting outside again, and I am discovering that no matter how overcast it may be, I still need to wear sunscreen, and we'll see how long it takes for my ears to blister here. But tomorrow we're doing the other half. So by the time this podcast is published, we will have crowned some champions for the 6th grade track meet. And it's a good experience for all the kiddos. I remember doing track my senior year of high school, and I still don't like running in circles, but, track's not for everybody. I like to run, just not in circles. But anyways, this week, I'm excited to announce that we are now featured on Patreon. You can find the link on Facebook, but Patreon is basically kind of like a GoFundMe, but it's for creators of content, so artists, authors, podcasters like myself. And I've created an account that will feature my content, and it'll also give you the opportunity to pitch in and support the podcast if you're able to. My subscription for the platform I publish on, Podbean, is coming up, due in June, and I'm just trying to defray some of the costs of this hobby. No hobby's free, but it's a lot easier to justify to my wife if it's not expensive. So if you're so inclined, you can follow that link to Patreon and become a member. I think it's $5 a month. And in exchange for your support, you'll not only have the satisfaction of knowing you're enabling me to continue producing hilarious stories, but we'll also send you your own Untold Tales from This Side of Nowhere Possibles kit. It features a matchbook, a book of matches, Band-Aids, fishing line and a hook, a piece of paper, and your very own teeny tiny pencil. And it all fits in a little tin about the size of an Altoids tin. So you will never be caught without matches or paper or any of those very important items. I've talked about the Possibles Kit on the podcast before, and I guarantee you'll love it just as much as I do. So you can follow that link on our Facebook page, and I do thank you for any and all support. So this week, without further ado, we're going to jump in and share another story. This is story number 36, 3 dozen. And I like this one. I think you're going to enjoy it too. It is entitled, or I should say, it is titled Fur-Bearing Trout. Jeez, moaned my twin brother Fred, his teeth chattering like ice cubes in a frosted glass. It's so cold. You can say that again, I shivered, hunching my shoulders against the icy wind as it whipped around me. I wish we had an ice fishing shelter, my cousin Jim wailed, breaking off an icicle that had formed in his left nostril. And an auger, I added. My right leg was still encased in ice from the knee down, and all feeling had long ago deserted that appendage. This is the last time I stomped through the ice on some guy's old hole. Well, you wouldn't have had to stomp through it if you hadn't broken the handle on the axe, Jim shot back. Fred tried to laugh, but it came out more like the gasping sound a cat makes when it gets sat on. Even if he had been able to laugh, the howling wind would have surely whisked it away before it could reach either Fred or I. Apparently, it was too cold for mirth. Though us 3 boys rarely caught anything while ice fishing, the truth is we had only tried it twice before, Jim had convinced us to come out on the lake this morning against my better judgment. Not that I had any better judgment. I don't know if any 11-year-old really has judgment in the first place, let alone multiple judgments to compare with each other. Regardless of my judgment, though, or lack thereof, here we were on the Wardell Reservoir, in the middle of a howling winter storm, ice fishing. I could think of a long list of things I would rather be doing, most of them involving a nice spot next to a toasty wood stove, but Jim had insisted we go. Rockwell promised he would pay me if we could catch a fur-bearing trout, Jim had told us. At the mention of Rockwell's name, Fred and I looked at each other knowingly. Rockwell, Jim's older brother and our cousin, was always getting us to do dumb things with the promise of monetary compensation. Every time, though, the cash either never appeared or the task was impossible. This latest task smelled like the latter of the two. Rockwell is always getting you to do dumb stuff, I said. What makes you think we're going to go along with you? We're not falling for another one of Rockwell's tricks. What is a fur-bearing trout anyways? Jim shrugged. Rockwell said he'd give me $20 if we caught one. We're in. And so it was that we were huddled around a hole in the ice, approximately the diameter of my right leg, dangling bait in the water like a group of penguins that dropped some car keys down a storm drain. I can't believe we're doing this for $20, Fred whined. I can't feel my toes. Don't worry, Jim consoled him. Just think about the money. At that time in my life, and before inflation took its most recent toll on the U.S. dollar, $20 was a lot of money. You could do so much with $20. $20 was enough to feed dinner to a family of 4, or go to the movies with friends and get popcorn and candy, or even fill a truck up with gas. You know, when I get older, I'm going to be rich, I said. I'm going to be a famous author whose books sell millions of copies. I'll buy us an ice fishing shelter that's nicer than our house. It will have a stove, easy chairs, and even a TV. We all shivered in silence for a moment, envisioning an ice fishing shelter of such mythical proportions. How are you going to do that? Jim asked. What will you write about? I don't know, but it'll be good, I said. People are always getting rich writing books and stuff. Look at J.K. Rowling. She made millions off Harry Potter. Yeah, well, I'm gonna win the lottery, Fred blurted out. I'll win a few $1,000,000 and buy a mansion. Then I'll donate a bunch of money to charity and buy a lifetime fishing and hunting license for all of us. I'll take you guys all over the world hunting big game and getting trophies to fill up my big house. That sounds like a pretty good plan, Jim said. Can anyone feel their hands? I need to open this bag of hot links so I can rebait the hook. I shook my head. I lost feeling in my hands a long time ago. Maybe you can get it open with your teeth. Do you think your mom will miss the hot links? Fred asked Jim. I doubt it, Jim replied, his words muffled as he attempted to tear open the hot links bag with his teeth. He doesn't even like hot links, he said. I doubt whether your mom would understand what we're trying to do anyway, I said between teeth-chattering episodes that threatened to loosen my molars. Adults didn't never waste time and resources on a long shot like this. They would never go fishing for furry trout. My dad said this was a wild goose chase. Why are we fishing with hot dogs again? Fred asked, his voice shaking to match his shivers. Well, Jim said, spitting out a chunk of plastic. It's like Rockwell said. Fur-bearing fish like hot food. Those hot links are frozen solid, Fred pointed out. I know, but it's not just about the temperature, Jim huffed, clapping his hands in an effort to get some feeling back into his fingers. The wind pulled at his hat, and he had to grip the hot links bag between his knees to keep it from blowing away and skittering off across the ice. Fur-bearing fish like spicy foods, too. Everyone knows that. Actually, I had never heard of fur-bearing fish before you brought them up, I grunted with my back to the wind. Well, it's like I told you. Rockwell says fur-bearing fish hate the cold, and that's why they start growing a winter coat when the temps drop below zero. They like spicy bait the best because it helps warm them up. Is that why we're fishing in this awful weather? I asked. So we can be sure the trout will have fur? About that time, Jim managed to get the hot links package open by chopping at it with the head of the broken axe. After a couple swings, he managed to bust off a chunk of sausage that would fit on the hook, so I reeled in the line with fumbling fingers. When the bare hook finally emerged from the hole in front of us, we could see the bait was now gone. That's a good sign, Fred said. It looks like they're eating the bait. I thought I felt a nibble, I agreed with chattering teeth. His hands numb from the cold, Jim fiddled around with the chunk of hot links, trying not to drop it or the hook. Just imagine, Fred said, when we're adults, we'll have good paying jobs and we'll be able to go fishing anywhere we like. We could even pay for guided fishing trips and stuff. We'll have to go fishing in Alaska. Yeah, but during the summer, I countered, as Jim made his third unsuccessful attempt at sliding the bait onto the hook. We're never going fishing in weather like this again. For sure, Fred nodded, cupping his hands over his mouth in an effort to warm them. It didn't help much. How many weeks do you think it takes to become the CEO of a company? Being an adult must be pretty great, I sighed. You can drive, you don't have to go to school, and you earn lots of money. You can buy whatever you want. Not everything you want, Fred corrected. You have to save some money. Well, yeah, I replied, but not all of it. Do you think getting a good job and getting rich is hard? We're going to be adults soon, and I don't want to waste my whole life waiting around to strike it rich. There you go, Jim said, finally getting the hot link onto the hook and letting it fall from his frozen fingers. Can't be harder than catching fur-bearing trout, I huffed as I dropped the hook back into the hole and let some line out of the reel. I had to press the button to release the line with the palm of my hand, since my thumbs were no longer bending at the joint. You can say that again, Jim agreed. Wowee! We better catch this fish quick and get back to the house. I don't think my hands and toes will ever be the same again. What will Rockwell even do when we give him the fur-bearing trout? Fred asked. Well, he says the fur is super valuable, Jim replied, burying his hands in his coat pockets. So he's gonna skin it and sell the hide? I asked. Something like that, Jim huffed. Why isn't Rockwell out here catching a fur-bearing trout himself? I asked. Jim harumphed. He says that now that he's a teenager, he doesn't have time for this kind of stuff. He says grown-ups never chase wild dreams. They spend their time earning money and investing it, then they make a fortune overnight. Well, I bet it won't take us much longer to catch one of these fish, Fred said. I've dumped at least a quart of shampoo down this hole. Do you really think it will attract the fish? I asked. Hey, if you had a fur coat, you would want some shampoo to help clean it, Jim shrugged. That's what Rockwell told me, at least. Fred screwed the cap back on the second bottle of shampoo with his teeth and asked, Has Rockwell actually caught one of these before? No, I don't think so, Jim replied. Geez, my hands are cold. Then how does he know fur-bearing trout exist? Fred asked. Oh, he's seen pictures of them on the internet. There are loads of people who catch them, Jim said breezily, or at least tried to. The wind was doing a pretty good job of whipping away any breezy comments. You just put in a little time fishing, use some shampoo and some hot links, and presto, you've got a fur-bearing fish. Just then I felt a tug on the line, and the tip of the pole dropped with a sudden jerk. Fish on! I yelled, and began trying in vain to crank on the reel. Well, what are you waiting for? Fred hollered. Reel him in! I can't. My fingers won't work, I shouted back. Just then, another jerk on the line pulled the rod straight from the feeble grasp of my frostbitten fingers. No! Jim wailed and dove after the retreating rod like a baseball player sliding into home. But it was too late. With a little splash of icy water, the short little ice fishing pole slid into the hole in the ice and disappeared. For a moment we sat in shock, just staring at the hole in the ice. Jim was still sprawled out on his stomach, his outstretched hands reaching towards the hole. Finally, Jim broke the silence. That was my only ice fishing pole, he wailed. We were so close, I yelled in frustration. I just know that would have been a furry fish. I just couldn't reel it in. For one brief moment, success had been in my grasp, and then, just as quickly, it was gone. Maybe we just need a bigger pole, Jim said. My dad has a bunch in the garage. That's it. I'm out of here, Fred grumbled, scooping up his tackle box. Even if there were fur-bearing fish, we'd never catch one. And besides, I think even my backside is going to have frostbite. I'm going back where it's warm. Fred stormed off, and I followed right behind him. Some warmth sounded like a pretty good idea to me. "Wait up, you guys!" Jim shouted, scrambling to stand up on the slick surface of the frozen reservoir. "I bet we can get another pole. Think about the $20. I waved a dismissive hand back over my shoulder and kept walking. After a few moments, Jim drew even with us, panting just a bit. "Look, I know fur-bearing trout didn't work out," he puffed. "But just you wait. When things warm up, Rockwell says he'll pay me $10 for every jackalope we can catch." There you go. Another untold tale from this side of nowhere. I actually just recently learned about furry trout from my little sister, Hallie Jones, who did the cover art for our podcast. She brought them to my attention, and I perused the internet and verified their existence. So I guess Al and Fred and Jim lived out what could have been a childhood dream of catching, or I guess almost catching, a fur-bearing fish. But if you haven't heard about them, you should look them up. These are pretty interesting critters, and if you catch one, I will most certainly give you $20. Well, it has been a pleasure having you here with me. If you want to share a story about furry fish or jackrabbits or jackalopes, just drop me a line at untoldtalesthepodcast@gmail.com. And we do have some listener mail that I would like to share with everyone today. This is from our friend and loyal listener, Heather, from Ryrie, Idaho. She says, "I drove from Idaho Falls to Salt Lake City and back yesterday in the pouring rain, and listening to this podcast for most of those hours made the trip bearable. I especially liked the episode about being a twin. On my last trip to Salt Lake, I laughed so hard during the chicken poop episode. I love hearing tales that are so similar to my childhood growing up in the West, surrounded by siblings, cousins, animals, dirt, sunshine, and no cell phones. It takes me back every time." Thanks for leaving your comment, Heather, and I'm glad to hear that you enjoyed the podcast. As always, this has been another untold tale from this side of nowhere, where we work twice as hard for half as much and still find time for the important things, like fishing. See you next time, folks.